Despite the fact that the game is Dungeons and Dragons, the Dragonborn race in 5e comes up noticeably short. Personally speaking, I rarely ever see a player choose this race. I DM a lot, and I play characters from time to time as well, and I can only think of a couple instances throughout this past decade in which someone played a Dragonborn. In this video, we're going to take a look at what went wrong with the design of Dragonborn in 5th edition and some ways in which we can revise it and strengthen it in order to be on par with humans, dwarves, elves, halflings, tieflings, and many other great race choices for player characters. Now, the Dragonborn do have a really cool style. You get to play a dragon man, a draconic humanoid, and they have some great illustrations. This is probably the best thing about Dragonborn in 5e, just the fact that you get to play a dragon, or at least a dragonkin. The Dragonborn lore is decent, I suppose. The race was originally hatched out of eggs by dragon gods, or powerful ancient dragons, made to combine the best of both dragons and humanoids. Some Dragonborn serve these draconic deities, or maybe they are servants or warriors and soldiers of literal worldly dragons. Others are more independent, they have their own purposes, and some even wander in search of meaning to their existence. They're tall and strong, they're fierce, they're a proud folk who live in clans. They're ambitious, they're loyal to each other, and they're talented with their own particular style of crafting and smithing. And, of course, they are a force to be reckoned with in battle. They value skill and excellence, and in some ways, their culture is a bit reminiscent of the dwarves. Overall, the Dragonborn lore is pretty good. It could definitely be better, but it's not bad. It leaves some space open for DMs to decide how the Dragonborn fit into their own settings, and for players to fill in the blanks for the Dragonborn characters' personal stories. So, really, the main problem with the Dragonborn race is its racial traits. The mechanics, the abilities that you get to wield, they're simply not enough and they're not effective enough. So, let's see what we can do to improve upon this. Before we take flight with our majestic dragonkin, make sure to like and subscribe. Your support always helps the channel grow and to keep providing you with the thought-provoking ideas and immersive adventures. Let's start really digging into this. To begin with, there are actually two different ways to do a Dragonborn in 5e. There's the Player's Handbook Dragonborn, which is the one everybody is familiar with. We can call this the Standard Dragonborn. And there is the Fizban's Treasury of Dragons Dragonborn, which attempted to improve the race in a couple of ways. We'll call this one the Fizban Dragonborn. With the Standard Dragonborn, you start off by picking a draconic ancestry, which is chosen from the 10 base kinds of dragons in D&D, the 5 chromatics and the 5 metallics. Which ancestry you choose determines what kind of breath weapon you have and what kind of damage you resist. The breath weapon is either a 30-foot line or a 10-foot cone, which is fairly short range, but I really wouldn't expect it to be any bigger of an area from just a starting racial trait. You get +2 to strength and +1 to charisma. Other than that, you speak common and draconic. That's it. There's nothing else that you really receive in terms of racial traits. Now, the damage resistance is very good, but it's also very situational. When you're exposed to your damage type, you'll be really glad that you have this, but the rest of the time, probably the vast majority of the time, this isn't going to be doing anything. Since the racial traits are so few, we can then presume that this means the breath weapon is going to be really strong, right? It's something that's so amazing, it makes it worth having a really limited number of racial traits. Well, unfortunately, this is not the case. The breath weapon is an action to use, and you can do so once per short rest. The saving throw DC for your breath weapon is 8, plus your Constitution modifier, plus your proficiency bonus. Pretty standard formula for 5e. This might be potentially a pretty good DC. It really depends on your character and how good their Constitution score is. The saving throw for 7 of the breath weapons is Dexterity, while the other 3 of them are Constitution saving throws, the 2 that deal cold damage and the 1 that deals poison. Now, if you really want to pick a dragon ancestry because it is the character story that you want to portray, please go for it. Do not let me or anyone else tell you otherwise. That said, many players are looking for effective options when building their characters, and we all know that monsters, in general, tend to be better at Constitution saving throws than Dexterity saving throws. This varies a lot depending upon what kind of enemies you're facing, but over the course of a campaign, you will more commonly come across physically tough monsters than you will quick, agile monsters. Also, it's very rare to fight a monster with a bad Constitution, but it's not so uncommon to fight monsters with bad Dexterity scores, like ogres, zombies, oozes, and many different constructs. The damage types are also interesting to consider. Damages like poison and fire are the most commonly resisted, or those with the highest number of monsters immune to them, with cold and lightning damage not too far behind. But those are also some of the most common damage types that you will be exposed to. So in a way, choosing fire or poison as your damage type is as much a defensive choice as it is an offensive one. Again, I really encourage you to consider your character's style and personal story with all of this, not just the mechanical strengths of it all. The real problem with the breath weapon, though, is the amount of damage it deals. At first level, it's 2d6 damage, or half damage for a creature that makes a successful saving throw. It's not great, but it's not bad. It's weaker than Burning Hands, but it's stronger than a cantrip, so it's almost a first level spell. Well, maybe the Acid Breath weapon could get classified as a first level if it were a spell. Plus, remember, you can do this every short rest. So at level 1, this really is good enough for a racial trait. The specific problem is that it scales poorly. It increases to 3d6 damage at 6th level, to 46 damage at 11th level, and finally to 5d6 damage at 16th level. It's not good. It could be worse, but unless you're in a really specific situation, you're probably better off doing pretty much anything else. Imagine you're a 6th level Dragonborn. If you're a warrior character, you're better off making 2 attacks through extra attack, or hiding and sneak attacking if you're a rogue. If you're a spellcaster, a cantrip is going to deal similar damage and probably have a much farther range. It's honestly sad, because you're supposed to be this great dragon person, but your signature ability, the breath, becomes a tertiary option, or maybe even worse. In 4E, the Dragonborn breath weapon was a bonus action to use. No matter what your ancestry was, the breath weapon targeted the reflex defense, which is equivalent to the dexterity saving throw of 5E. Also, in 4E, all characters got a lot more feats, and the feats did not compete against the ability score increases, which made it very accessible for anyone to focus on defeats that made their breath weapon better. It's really disappointing to see that what was one of the best races in 4E loses its steam when translated into 5E. Then comes 2021's Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, with a new take on the Dragonborn. It gives us a new option that seeks to make the race have deeper and more effective racial traits. But did it succeed? Well, let's see. This version says that you get +2 to one ability score of choice, and +1 to a different ability score of choice, or +1 to 3 different ability scores of your choice. This is not specific to only the Dragonborn race, however, and I believe that all the non-human races now have this option instead of the set ability score increases. I kind of agree with this, and I kind of don't. I think that the non-human races should all have some kind of set ability score increase that most expresses what that race is, such as Constitution for dwarves, Dexterity for elves, etc. Then, along with that set ability score, should be some kind of flexible one that represents how humanoid races all have a good amount of variety within themselves. Maybe you would say the halflings don't get the option to put it into strength because they're small and like 3 feet skinny things, and maybe the the half-orc doesn't get the option to put it into charisma or intelligence. That would be fine. I think that'd be a good way to go. It's a nice balance between the two approaches. Moving on to the Fizban Dragonborn's racial traits. With this version, you select whether you have ancestry with a chromatic dragon, gem dragon, or metallic dragon. Then within each of these, you pick the specific kind of dragon: black, blue, green, red, or white for chromatics, amethyst, crystal, emerald, sapphire, or topaz for gems, and brass, bronze, copper, gold, or silver for metallics. You still have the damage resistance and a breath weapon damage type of your associated dragon. The way the breath weapon functions is different in some key ways. For the Fizban Dragonborn, it's no longer its own action, but rather when you take the attack action, you can substitute one attack with your breath weapon. All the chromatic Dragonborn have 30-foot line areas, and all the gem and metallic Dragonborn have 15-foot cone areas. All the saving throws for half damage are dexterity, which I think is a good way to go. The damage amount is now 1d10 at first level, 2d10 at 5th level, 3d10 at 11th level, and 4d10 at 17th level. So, at first level, the breath weapon is a little worse than the standard Dragonborns, but as soon as you hit 5th level, it is equivalent, or it's superior if you have the extra attack class feature. Since it replaces one attack of the attack action, this means that a 5th level Dragonborn fighter can make a weapon attack and a breath weapon blast instead of 2 weapon attacks. That said, if you have the Great Weapon Master feat, you might just make the 2 power attacks in most situations. Then at 11th level and later on at 17th level, the Fizban's breath weapon damage shines a little bit more. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the damage amounts of the 2 different breath weapons. For the first few levels, the Fizban Dragonborn is worse. Then starting at 5th level, things start to swing in its favor. Again, the Fizban Dragonborn will do even more damage if you have extra attack when you can do the breath weapon and your weapon attack. So melee characters really are able to capitalize on it. Another difference is that the Fizban Dragonborn can use the breath weapon a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest, meaning that if you want, you can use it multiple times in a single encounter. Just looking at all this, I'm going to say that overall the Fizban breath weapon is better than the standard Dragonborns. In addition, at 5th level, the Fizban Dragonborn receives an additional racial trait that is usable once per long rest. For Chromatic Dragonborn, you can spend an action to gain a minute of immunity to your associated damage type. For Gem Dragonborn, you can spend a bonus action to gain a flying speed equal to your walking speed for 1 minute. And for Metallic Dragonborn, as an action, you can use a different kind of breath weapon that either incapacitates the target till the start of your next turn if it fails a con save, or repels the target 20 feet away from you and knocks it prone on a failed strength save. These additional racial traits are all nice, and they're useful in their own ways, and I really appreciate how they add to the quantity of traits as compared to the standard Dragonborn from the player's handbook. He just doesn't get enough features. Oh, also, don't overlook this. Starting at first level, the Gem Dragonborn can send telepathic messages to creatures that you can see within 30 feet. Send, but not receive. It's a nice minor feature, though of course it would be much better if the target could telepathically speak back to you. I'm going to compare here the standard Dragonborn to the Fizban Dragonborn. The Fizban variety is clearly better. Wizards of the Coast listened to people's legitimate complaints over the years and provided a much more viable option for the race. It is still somewhat weak during levels 1 through 4, and a lot of D&D games are at those levels, so in a way it's still kind of a bummer. Your breath weapon starts off weaker than a first level spell, and in some situations weaker than even a cantrip. In other situations maybe a little stronger than a cantrip. And there's still another problem, which I find to be a glaring one. The Dragonborn racial traits really don't capture the full essence of the race. They don't completely express through the mechanics what we see in the art. We see a monstrous race that is covered in scaly hide. They have spikes, crests, clawed fingers. and a long draconic snout filled with sharp fangs. None of that is in the traits. It's kind of mind-boggling. If you showed a picture of this to a person who did not play D&D and you asked them what they thought this race was capable of, I'm sure they would think that the Dragonborn's scales protect them, and their claws and fangs are these dangerous natural weapons. That's how dragons are, and regular animals too, for that matter. Why are these things absent from the Dragonborn's racial traits? So what we're running up against is a limitation, or even a flaw, that 5th edition has. It forces all races into the same mold in terms of power level. They must all fit under this certain power threshold, even if it's contrived, even if it makes no sense. This is a trend that began with 4E, and it's also influenced by MMOs and other video games. Let's focus on making a new version of the Dragonborn that does fit within the standard framework of 5th edition. I'd like to begin with thinking about the essential traits. What aspects should the Dragonborn race have? What racial traits are needed in order to really capture and express the essence of a draconic humanoid? I would say they are the following: a bonus to the strength score, scales that protect you in some way, they're more than merely a visual skin, bite and claw natural weapons, a breath weapon that feels powerful to unleash, resistance to your associated damage type, and the ability to speak the draconic tongue. I think that these are the essentials. Squeezing in an additional minor flavorful trait would be nice, but it's really not essential. It's not a deal breaker. We could also develop a feat or two that expand upon the Dragonborn in some unique ways. Ability score increase. Your strength score increases by 2, and one other ability score of your choice increases by 1. This fits because dragons are iconic for their great strength, and the Dragonborn are big for a humanoid race. They stand like 6.5 to 7 feet tall. They weigh, say, 230 to maybe up to 300 pounds. Then the +1 to one other ability score of choice makes sense because this is a versatile race. And dragons, as in true dragons, they have all kinds of other ability scores that can be high depending upon the type of dragon. Draconic ancestry. You have draconic ancestry. Choose one type of dragon from the draconic ancestry table. Your breath weapon and damage resistance are determined by the dragon type as shown in the table. And as you can see here, I'm sticking with the standard Dragonborn for these. They line up with what the actual dragons breathe. I'm not including the gem dragons here since they're not SRD open content. I might want to do something with this race remake, but you can easily reference the Fizban Dragonborn to find these damage types. Amethyst has Force, Topaz has Necrotic, Crystal's Radiant, Sapphire is Thunder, and Emerald is Psychic. Breath weapon. You can use your action to exhale destructive energy. Your draconic ancestry determines the size, shape, and damage type of the exhalation. When you use your breath weapon, each creature in the area of the exhalation must make a dexterity saving throw. The DC for the saving throw equals 8 plus your constitution modifier plus your proficiency bonus. A creature takes 2d6 damage on a failed save and half as much damage on a successful one. The damage increases by 1d6 every 2 levels beyond first, 3d6 at 3rd level, 4d6 at 5th level, etc. After you use your breath weapon, you can't use it again until you complete a short or long rest. This here feels worthy of being called Dragon Breath. Now obviously it isn't as powerful as a true dragon's breath weapon, but it is strong enough to give you that thrill of being a dragon that's unleashing a powerful blast. This sort of thing is more satisfying than getting more frequent medium or lesser breath attacks. Due to the higher damage, this is a viable option for both warrior and spellcaster Dragonborn. Warriors can often justify dedicating their action to breathing instead of making weapon attacks due to the damage amount, the potential for multiple affected enemies, and half damage guaranteed even on a successful save. And unlike the Fizban dragon, you're not forced into doing this weapon attack plus breath weapon in order to deal a respectable amount of damage. If you're unleashing a powerful blast from your mouth, you're going to be fully focused on that, not in the middle of sword play. Casters will also benefit from the stronger breath weapon, who otherwise, in both the standard and the Fizban Dragonborn cases, are usually going to prefer one of their spells, even a cantrip. With the breath weapon scaling up by 1d6 every 2 levels, it is clearly stronger than a cantrip, but not as strong as the party's higher levels of spells. Damage resistance. You have resistance to the damage type associated with your draconic ancestry. There isn't much to say here. This feature was already good from the beginning of 5e, and it's only fitting for the race. Dragon Scales. You gain a +1 bonus to AC. This is a simple but very effective solution to express that you are covered in dragon-like scales. Alternatively, you could go with the following instead of a general +1 to AC. Dragon Scales. When you're not wearing armor, your AC equals 13 plus your dexterity modifier. If you have the Draconic Resilience Sorcerer feature, this increases to 14 plus your dexterity modifier. I'm not particularly fond of this approach. It doesn't make a lot of sense. If you wear a suit of armor on top of natural armor like scales, that only further adds to your protection. It doesn't take away or replace your scales or your naturally thick hide. I do understand that this is a fantasy game, but when something is so out of line with obvious, common sense reality, it does annoy me. But I would understand if somebody opted for this route due to feeling that +1 AC pushes the Dragonborn race over the line in terms of racial power level. Natural weapons. Your Fanged Bite and Clawed Hands are natural weapons, which you can use to make unarmed strikes. Your bite attack deals 1d4 piercing damage, and each of your hands has a claw attack that deals 1d4 slashing damage. For most characters, these natural weapons will serve as a kind of secondary or tertiary backup weapon. Attacking with your bite or claws no stronger than attacking with a dagger. But when we have art that shows menacing fangs and claws, and then the race has no mechanic whatsoever to support this, it breaks the immersion and the ability to believe in the character. Languages. You can speak, read, and write Common and Draconic. Again, not much to say here, it's only right and natural. Some will argue that the Dragonborn should have dark vision, and while that does make sense, I don't think it's totally essential, and these traits that I've laid out already amount to a rather strong race. Anything above this would probably be too much. The end result is a powerful Dragonborn race. Got the ability score increase, the Draconic ancestry that feeds into the breath weapon that's improved, and the damage resistance. You got the dragon scales, the natural weapons, and the common and draconic languages. But is it more powerful than the human? The human gets proficiency in any one skill of choice and also a feat. Let's think of options like Great Weapon Master, Sharpshooter, Polearm Master, Heavy Armor Master, Sentinel, Magic Initiate, Shadow Touched, Fey Touched, Lucky. These are feats that you will be using constantly, and they bring your character a remarkable amount of power. I think that this Dragonborn here is very competitive with the human. In my own campaigns, I have offered essentially this house rule version of the Dragonborn for years, and I've only seen 2 Dragonborn characters compared to countless numbers of humans. Feats are just so incredibly good in 5e, plus they're really flavorful. I gotta say this, players are starved for feats, being that you rarely get them, and you have to sacrifice your ability score improvements in order to get them. Again, if this seems a little too much, switch the +1 AC to the 13 plus Dex natural armor and call it good. Now, let's finish off by taking a look at a couple of feats I've designed to further help the Dragonborn race really enhance the feeling of being dragon-like. Mighty Breath. Prerequisite, Dragonborn. You have tapped into your draconic nature even further and are now capable of unleashing the full force of your breath weapon. You gain the following benefits. Increase the DC of your breath weapon by 1. Increase the area of your breath weapon. A 5 by 30 foot line becomes a 5 by 60 foot line, and a 15 foot cone becomes a 30 foot cone. The damage dealt by your breath weapon ignores damage resistance. Immunity still functions as normal. After using your breath weapon, roll 1d6 at the start of each of your turns. Your breath weapon recharges on a 6. Draconic Form. Prerequisite, Dragonborn. You have tapped into your draconic nature even further, and your body and senses develop in extraordinary ways. you gain the following benefits. You gain dark vision out to 120 feet. You gain blind sight out to 10 feet. In effect, you can see out to that range, even if blinded or in a heavily obscured area. And you can see invisible creatures and objects within 10 feet unless they're successfully hiding. The damage of your bite and claw attacks increase to 1d8. Your claws are now treated as having the light and finesse properties, and you can use your claws for 2-weapon fighting. At 8th level, you develop a pair of draconic wings that provide you a flying speed equal to your walking speed. So there we have it, an enhanced version of the Dragonborn that takes the building blocks of what began in the basics of 5e and develops it into something truly worthy of the name Dragonborn. Along with the race being improved, there are 2 feats for those players who really want to dig into the dragon-like qualities of the race. So what do you think? Could you see yourself implementing these Esperian Dragonborn in your own campaigns? If so, I'm including a link down below to a free Patreon post, and you can go there and download a simple PDF of this remade Dragonborn of mine. So I want to thank you for watching, and as always, may your adventures be many.